On September 4th, 476 AD, a barbarian warlord named Odoacer walked into the palace at Ravenna and deposed the last Roman emperor. His name was Romulus Augustulus. He was 16 years old. With that single act, the Roman Empire, which had dominated the world for over 500 years, ceased to exist. No massive battle, no climactic siege, no dramatic last stand, just a teenager forced to abdicate, and an empire that had been dying for decades finally taking its last breath. This is the story of how the greatest empire in human history collapsed, not with a bang, but with a whimper. At its peak in 117 AD under Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire was the most powerful civilization on Earth. It controlled 5 million square kilometers of territory, from Britain in the north to Egypt in the south, from Spain in the west to Mesopotamia in the east. Over 70 million people lived under Roman rule, nearly a quarter of the world's population. Rome's legions were invincible. Its engineering marvels, roads, aqueducts, buildings, still stand today. Its law and language shaped Western civilization. For centuries, Rome seemed eternal, unshakable, destined to rule forever. But empires don't last forever, and Rome's fall didn't happen overnight. The seeds of destruction were planted long before 476 AD. In 284 AD, Emperor Diocletian recognized that the empire had grown too large for one man to govern. He split it into two administrative halves, the Western Roman Empire, with its capital eventually at Ravenna, and the Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital at Constantinople. This division was meant to make the empire easier to manage. Instead, it created a fatal weakness. The two halves increasingly acted as separate entities. They had different priorities, different challenges, and eventually, different fates. The Western Empire, which would fall in 476, faced problems the Eastern Empire didn't. By the 4th century AD, Rome faced multiple crises simultaneously. First, economic collapse. Constant warfare drained the treasury. The government debased the currency, causing massive inflation. Trade networks broke down. Cities declined as people fled to the countryside for safety. Second, military weakness. The once invincible Roman legions were stretched thin, defending thousands of miles of frontier. Rome increasingly relied on barbarian mercenaries to fill its ranks, warriors who felt no loyalty to Rome. Third, political instability. Between 235 and 284 AD, a period called the Crisis of the 3rd Century. Rome had over 50 emperors. Most were murdered. Civil wars devastated the empire. The government lost legitimacy. Fourth, external pressure. Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine and Danube rivers grew stronger. The Huns, migrating from Central Asia, pushed these tribes toward Roman territory. Rome's borders came under constant attack. And finally, cultural transformation. Christianity became the official religion in 380 AD, replacing the old Roman gods. This massive shift changed Roman identity and values. Any one of these crises might have been survivable. Together, they were catastrophic. The beginning of the end came in 376 AD. The Huns, fierce nomadic warriors from the Asian steppes, swept into Europe, destroying everything in their path. Fleeing the Huns, a Germanic tribe called the Goths asked Rome for permission to cross the Danube River and settle inside Roman territory. The Romans agreed, hoping to use the Goths as a buffer against other barbarians. But the Roman officials who were supposed to provide food and land for the Goths instead exploited them. They were starved, abused, and sold into slavery. The Goths rebelled. On August 9, 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople, Gothic warriors ambushed a Roman army led by Emperor Valens. The Romans were slaughtered. 2/3 of the army, perhaps 20,000 men, died. Emperor Valens himself was killed. This was unprecedented. Barbarians had defeated Rome's main field army and killed an emperor. Rome never recovered from Adrianople. The empire no longer had the manpower to defend its borders. From this point forward, Rome had to negotiate with barbarian tribes rather than defeat them. The floodgates were open. In 406 AD, a massive wave of Germanic tribes, Vandals, Alans, Suebi, crossed the frozen Rhine River and invaded Gaul. Rome couldn't stop them. In 410 AD, the Visigoths, led by King Alaric, sacked Rome itself. For the first time in 800 years, a foreign enemy had captured the Eternal City. The psychological impact was devastating. If Rome could fall, nothing was permanent. In 455 AD, the Vandals sailed from North Africa and sacked Rome again, this time looting it for 2 weeks. Roman authority in the western provinces disintegrated. Britain, Gaul, Spain, North Africa all fell under barbarian control. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire consisted of little more than Italy itself. The Eastern Roman Empire, what we call the Byzantine Empire, survived. Constantinople remained powerful, wealthy, and secure. But the West was finished. By 476, the Roman emperor was a figurehead. Real power lay with barbarian generals who commanded the armies. The last of these generals was Odoacer, a Germanic warrior who commanded Rome's remaining forces in Italy. The nominal emperor was Romulus Augustulus, a 16-year-old boy whose father, a Roman general named Orestes, had placed him on the throne just 1 year earlier. Romulus Augustulus's name was almost a cruel joke. Romulus was the legendary founder of Rome. Augustus was Rome's first emperor. But this Romulus would be Rome's last emperor, and Augustulus meant Little Augustus, a diminutive suggesting weakness. On September 4, 476 AD, Odoacer's forces marched on Ravenna, where the imperial court had relocated because it was more defensible than Rome. There was no battle. Orestes was captured and executed. Young Romulus Augustulus was brought before Odoacer. Odoacer didn't kill the boy. Instead, he pensioned him off, gave him a comfortable retirement in a villa in Campania. Some sources say Romulus lived for decades afterward, a forgotten footnote to history. But Odoacer refused to name a new emperor. Instead, he declared himself king of Italy and sent the imperial regalia, the crown, scepter, and purple robes, to Constantinople, acknowledging the Eastern emperor as the sole Roman emperor. The Western Roman Empire was over. Historians mark September 4, 476 AD, as the official end of the Western Roman Empire and the beginning of the Middle Ages. But here's the important thing to understand. Nobody at the time realized this was the end. There was no announcement that the empire had fallen, no recognition that an era had ended. People living through 476 AD didn't wake up and think, the Roman Empire fell today. For them, it was just another political transition in a long series of upheavals. The Roman Senate continued to meet. Cities still functioned. Aqueducts still carried water. Roads still connected provinces. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced Roman rule, the Ostrogoths in Italy, the Visigoths in Spain, the Franks in Gaul, all claimed to be continuing Roman civilization, not destroying it. Odoacer minted coins with the Eastern Emperor's image. He maintained Roman law and administration. He presented himself as Rome's protector, not its destroyer. In many ways, Roman civilization continued. The Latin language evolved into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Roman law influenced legal systems for centuries. The Catholic Church preserved Roman administrative structures. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, survived for another 1,000 years until Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453. So did Rome really fall in 476, or did it just transform? Historians debate this question endlessly. Some argue Rome never fell. It just changed. The transformation from ancient to medieval was gradual, not sudden. Others argue 476 marks a clear break. The unified Mediterranean world Rome created was gone. Europe fragmented into competing kingdoms. Classical learning declined. Cities shrank. Long-distance trade collapsed. Population decreased. The world that emerged from Rome's ashes was fundamentally different from the world Rome had created. Why did Rome fall? Historians have proposed hundreds of theories over the centuries. Edward Gibbon, writing in the 18th century, blamed Christianity for weakening Roman martial values. Others blamed lead poisoning from Roman plumbing, or moral decay, or economic problems, or barbarian invasions, or climate change, or even malaria. The truth is that Rome fell because of many factors working together. Military overextension, Rome's borders were too long to defend. Economic crisis, constant warfare and inflation destroyed the economy. Political instability, weak emperors and civil wars prevented effective governance. Barbarian pressure, waves of migration overwhelmed Roman defenses. Cultural transformation, the empire's identity changed as Christianity replaced traditional Roman religion. And perhaps most importantly, loss of civic spirit. Romans stopped identifying with the empire. Local identities became more important than Roman identity. People stopped caring whether Rome survived. An empire that its own citizens don't believe in cannot stand. The fall of Rome terrified people for centuries. If Rome, eternal, invincible Rome, could fall, then any civilization could fall. Medieval and Renaissance thinkers obsessed over Rome's collapse, trying to understand what went wrong so they could avoid the same fate. The fall of Rome shaped European consciousness for over 1,000 years. It became a warning about the fragility of civilization, the dangers of moral decay, the consequences of military weakness. Even today, people invoke the fall of Rome when discussing the decline of modern powers. But perhaps the more important lesson is this: empires always end. No matter how powerful, how wealthy, how advanced, every empire in history has eventually fallen. Rome lasted 500 years in the West, 1,500 years in the East. That's an extraordinary achievement. Most empires don't last half as long, and even in death, Rome shaped the world. Western civilization, its laws, languages, architecture, engineering, philosophy, all trace back to Rome. The barbarians who destroyed Rome became Romans themselves, adopting Roman culture and claiming Roman legitimacy. On September 4th, 476 AD, a teenage emperor was deposed by a barbarian general. The Western Roman Empire ended not with a glorious battle, but with a quiet surrender. The greatest empire in ancient history died not because it was conquered, but because it was exhausted, hollowed out from within by centuries of crisis. But Rome's legacy didn't die. It transformed, mutated, and lived on in new forms. Every Western government that claims to represent law and order traces its lineage to Rome. Every Romance language evolved from Latin. Every architectural dome echoes the Pantheon. Rome fell. But Rome never really died. The empire that couldn't last forever left a mark that will last as long as civilization itself.